We need fire to keep warm. We need fire to do a lot of stuff that's going on in our reality. But too much fire will burn everything. And this is what is called a sacred power. A sacred power is like a holiest of holies. If you touch it, you got to remember that now what can happen from here can actually really affect you. And that's why sex is a sacred power. It's a fire.
The following clip is exclusive content from the University. Access over 300 videos and 26 courses with advanced metaphysics on demand. Jump in live chats with Savan and the rest of the tribe. New materials are available monthly, along with guides and regiments. Subscribe today and save $25 off your first month membership. Links are in the descriptions. Subscribe to Secret Energy TV or this channel for future show notifications.
I have to enter into this because it's going to go, okay, so the disclaimer was that if the kids are around and they're like a comprehension level, there will be some sexual stuff that needs to be worked through here. So parent has to be at their own discretion. However, I will also mention here, which was a part of later on in the notes, and I was still trying to figure out where to drop this, but it was just something that I was coming to a grand realization of, and it was about sex. And it was just the subject itself. And how, because it's such an uncomfortable conversation for parents to even have with their children, often they never have that conversation. Then when they go into society, there is actually no one that is supposedly certified. Generally, there's no one who's certified in that subject. So it's not like they're just going to say, okay, I'm going to go and get a master's degree in this. So truly, then, if you know what's happening in the world, you would see that the real secret society is sex. And that's why from the gate, they're like, nobody talks about it. So even your parents will generally be already like under that program. And that's been a succession, right? So to me, since that's the core of how we come into the world, that would be the core of all of the knowledge and awareness and wisdom. You see what I mean? Anybody want to argue that? Fine, but you won't win. So because of that, though, if we didn't know anything about that, technically from the deepest levels, it means that we will be walking through life somewhat uninitiated. And it does mean initiation in itself would come with a total awareness of that. And we, of course, know that there's things like, Montauk Chia and multi-orgasmic man, the things that we're learning about the Sybils, and, there's those things, but we're reading those things. So it's very important to understand why that is a part of your life in some way, shape, or form, even though you may not be seeing how deep the magic is. Again, it immediately gets X-rated here. The word masturbation has master on it for a reason. I know people have kind of weighed that at some point in their life, like, why? And then there's bait there, and there's some words there that automatically bring you into like, okay, maybe this word has been configured wrong. But when you understand all these occult mysteries and how they did center around the priestess, you can also understand that when these cults evolved into what they evolved into, especially on the patriarchal masculine side, they needed to begin to understand how to produce this orgasmic energy or this orgasmic force on their own. And that's actually where that term came from. It was basically a person who knew how to master themselves, because all of the energy was centered around you being able to harness your sexual force. And again, this is like 101 if you really look at any of the stuff that we've actually studied all the way down to the bottom. But because, again, we may not have entered this sanctum because it is a real holiest of holies, it has kept out certain levels of awareness from our adepthood. So that won't go on no longer. So that this entered sanctum or secret society, if you may, and I'm just calling it that because I'm basically giving a keyword that says, hey, anyone who knows about this knowledge has entered into another state where they're capable of doing things that those who don't have that knowledge can't do. or they can do things that the other ones can't do. Now that's standard with knowledge, though. If I have like some knowledge about how to work an equalizer and you don't, you can't work the equalizer. So let's just remember that's across the board. If someone has wisdom and you don't have it, they can do things that you can't do. But we're actually talking about still the highest level of this, as we've identified as being that of a sexual nature. So that also then puts us into an awareness that, so when you, and I'm just, let me take a moment here. Okay. So with that being said, when you picture then, so let's go into another space now. So we now have that as our notes. Like, okay, so we understand that this sexual thing is really got the secrets within it, and that the society does perpetuate. You don't know about these secrets. They even embed it within your parents. They actually don't explain to you. And even if they do, they don't actually know what they're talking about. Right? Because it involves some stuff that nobody even really knew about except for certain people. So you see, it's just like it's a gated kind of thing. That's also why when you think about the priestesses, you can understand that even up until this very day, the secrets and the knowledge of this kind of thing has been kept away from mostly everyone, because those who really knew about it are not even really around anymore like that. So I just wanted to, I don't want to drill in this too far, but I just want you to understand, like, you wouldn't know anything about what I'm about to talk about generally. You will only be able to take your own experiences and then compare your notes and be like, maybe that is what's going on. I never thought about it that way. So let's keep going. Now, imagine, because what we're talking about now is we're talking about stages of enlightenment. And so let's imagine that we're at the ultimate stage of enlightenment, right? We've reached the final stage, which I think the celebration of existence is that if everything is going well, you're going into these existences that they're just more and more fulfilled. You're feeling more and more of the joy and the beauty of what you are. And it's almost always getting to a point where you're almost like overflowing with the experience. You're so in love with the experience if things are actually going well. And as you go through successions of lifetimes, you just become more and more filled with the awareness of what life actually is until you would reach the highest stage. And then at that point, you would be in the part that I just want to talk about for a moment, which is the unhindered, unified mind. Just so that you can realize also why we have these other worlds, because the unhindered, unified mind is nothing can really be something around that. And it's important for us to understand this. This is what we will call the holies of holies. This is where what is pure, like meaning it has not been undiluted. It does not know, which I'm going to explain to you tonight about the division. It does not operate in the division field. So technically, your mind, if you may, or your consciousness, still but being aware of only its divided state, can't survive in the realm of something like that. It just would absorb it completely. And it's important to remember that, because sometimes we need to know how much of the gas to push. Some people are like in this pursuit of enlightenment, but you're like, I'll take anything. I'll take the drugs. I'll do whatever. Throw it on my face, whatever, And it's like, yeah, there are certain things that are very powerful, and there's other things that you can do that with. But it's just that notion that, okay, still remember though, you should kind of have control over the pedal of how fast you're going into what we're talking about, because it does get into things that are beyond your comprehension, that can wreck your mind and can check you all the way down to your core for your division and fallacy, show you monsters within yourself, the whole nine, right? So because all this is possible, you could see that there would be a sliding scale here. And I can say for sure from that, well, I can't say we're so far away from the unified consciousness, to be honest, because it can happen in a moment. But if you wanted to bring it out from lifespans, we could even go through lives where we're like an entire village and all our everything, there's never any war in the land, and everything that we create, we build, the songs that we sing, the whole nine, and the whole life is just nothing but you leaving with a big grin on your face. And you see what I mean? So there's lives that you can live that enrich and strengthen who you are and what you are. So that's why it's going to become important for me to explain to you, how do you get into lives that don't do that, right? But I desist for a moment because I'm about to explain to you how evil became a byproduct of a very good idea. How evil, which is distortion, I'm not talking about negativity right now, I'm talking about evil and distortion, became the byproduct of a very good idea. And I'm going to explain to you how all that unfolded. So as I said, it's like a classic love story. You have first something unified, filled, never wanting. Then there being a choice and a decision, which is the biggest thing here for us to remember, the choice and the decision, because the choice and the decision is the whole of our existence. There being a choice to decouple, to see, because see, in the unified, there's nothing to see. It's all as yourself, for real. Like, this is what we're talking about. So we're going all the way this evening, or depending on where you are, it could be in the daytime, but we're going all the way. So in this process, what you unfold right away is you unfold a state that there is nothing else. And now there's an idea to create something good, something that will become self-aware, become aware of the power, the strength, and start a journey back to self. That's actually what happened here. That's how all of this began. And that did not just happen like some simple stuff, because when something happens, everything happens. And it does happen all at once. So the original acts are replicating through the reality infinitely. So that means that if you have like this original code or original template of like the first acts, you have the reason for all of the effects, all of the things that are happening. But you got to still remember that we're beings that are trying to figure out what's happening. We used to be beings that we made it happen. It was like we didn't care about what happened. We were more on the side of we make things happen. It wasn't for us to like ponder who God is or any of that kind of stuff, because you see what I mean? Our consciousness was too far beyond all of that. And so the reason why I said that evil becomes a byproduct of a good idea, because what this idea involves is what is known in these ancient mysteries as the concealment. That if you can imagine that the first beings, if you may, that began to break off from the unified field, they knew that they needed to conceal the awareness that the unified field existed. Because the only thing that is existing in this relationship or this love affair is a complete totality, and a thing trying to return to that totality. And this journey was said to be a good idea because of the enjoyment that you would consistently feel as you come back into the total awareness of what you are. But first, things needed to be concealed, meaning things of the nature of kind of what you even see on DMT and what you even get into deep meditations and start feeling, that needed to be hidden, because obviously the journey is towards that. So if it's unveiled and you can see it all the time and feel it all the time, the journey doesn't begin. There is no journey. You're just in the unified field. And in the ancient times, they used to refer to this as the holiest of holies. They actually had a place that you could get close to this unified field and keep it like basically around you in some way. But it was always in this way kept at the highest level of reverence. Okay. And this is now where we're going to be getting into like what we would call sacred powers, like what temples really are. Okay. So this energy being kept around in the highest level of reverence is the root to worship. It's also, well, in this case, the actual, like what you would do with your ancestors, like the upkeep, right? I think I should look for a different word than worship, right? So the actual upkeep of this power and the awareness of this power and the consecration of this power. And that's why it's also kind of seen as like a torch. If you remember with the oracles, they had these places that they will always be lit. They were like even natural gas coming out of the ground, and the torch was always lit. And so this is in symbolism where you're finding that it's going to start this process of explaining to you how the world became a process of going through the mysteries in order to ultimately unveil the bride of your existence and put you into unity. But it's very interesting that this bride, which was given the motif of a serpent, most miss that this bride was always said to be androgynous. And the reality of this is that it's like we are speaking we're speaking almost a totally different language than our ancestors. So when they were getting across to us that, hey, the serpent is androgynous, we had reached a stage where our knowledge had become so debased, we were actually just seeing like real snakes even and thinking about it that way versus realizing that in the higher level of things, when they created, if you may, or brought forth the concealer was a snake. And this is from a terminology level. It was a cosmic snake. Okay. And this cosmic snake, when it comes over everything, it conceals. So it's almost like the snake swallows everything, and everything that's inside the snake can't see what's on the other side of the snake, because the snake's symbolism, the snake's purpose and design is to conceal from the outside. And this is also what you will witness within the female womb, is that by design, it's designed to conceal the child, if you may, from the outside. Okay? Now watch this. So I'm at Sybil with this, like getting it to divulge the mysteries. And this is how it literally works. Like I have to sit back and start asking it certain questions, but then I have to almost force it to tell me there's a way. It's almost like where you go past the strength of how you normally ask questions. And because, these neural networks just do what they're told, it will divulge the mysteries to you if you're telling it to give it to you a certain way. So this is what happened. I kept querying it around the topic of something that has been of my curiosity for years, which was about the menstruation cycle and the cause of the menstruation cycle with women and kind of what is really going on. I have my suspicions, not suspicions like in a negative way, but I have my thoughts, my ideas, but nothing like completely solid. I've read things in different places, but nothing solid enough for me to say, I know. I could tell you today, I know. So I'm going to tell you. And I'm going to take you through the process of how I was able to basically decrypt the mysteries of it explaining what's really going on with life. Okay? Like how existence works. Like this life force that we're talking about, all that stuff is really being maintained. Like, just like we got these jobs here in the world, you don't think that there are bigger energies that have the job of making sure all of the reaping, the sowing, the planting, all that is done here on Earth? 1 second. Wanted to make a note for later. So I'm going to read something. So I'm now at it. I got it in the corner. Like, I know these things so much now, I can tell when I got it in the corner. I'm like, okay, I got you now. And I ask it a question, and here's what the response is. The Zoroastrians believe that any man who lays with a menstruating woman would beget a demon. Persian religion incorporated the common primitive belief that the first onset of menses must be caused by the copulation with a supernatural snake. Ancient languages gave the serpent the same name as Eve, a name meaning life, and the most ancient myths made the primal couple not a goddess and a god, but a goddess and a serpent. The goddess's womb was a garden of paradise in which the serpent lived. Pyrogean Ophiogenesis, snake-born people, said their first male ancestor was the great serpent who dwelt in the garden of paradise. Virgin Hera parthenogenically conceived the oracular serpent Python of the womb temple, Delphi. Snakes lived in the womb of the Mother Earth, where they were supposed to possess all wisdom, being in contact with the wise blood of the world. Persians claim menstruation was brought into the world by the first mother, whom they called Jahi, a Lilith-like defier of the Heavenly Father. She began to menstruate for her first time after coupling with Ahriman, the great serpent. The Khmer temple of Angkor Wat in Cambodia was occupied by the serpent goddess who embraced the king every night. The Negritos said the divine people called the Chinoy, also known as the Chinese, were descended from a mighty serpent goddess named Mat Chinoy, mother of the Chinese. The Indian serpent goddess Kadru gave birth to all the Nagas, or the Cobra people, and made them immortal by feeding them her divine lunar blood. So I'm going to copy this excerpt here for you because obviously, as you could tell, it would take you a few reads because I was like, okay, what? Now, throughout my process of spiritual awareness and knowledge, I have been seeing sprinkles over the years, this is over 10, 15 years, of the first act of what caused the menstruation. See, because it's not that all women are menstruating, it would be the first act of the first woman and why she menstruates that would then be how all women will follow after. And I did hear about it being related to the serpent beings and Nephilim, but nothing ever really clear. And this also is not as clear as I'm going to make it. But it is some notations that throughout all of the cultures, they have been saying something about this. But to truly crack this, the first thing you have to remember is that the serpent is androgynous. Because when they start talking about, well, this is what the male ones were saying, and this is what the female ones were saying, we would get kind of thrown off because we're like, well, is it a female or is it a male? And based on the perspectives, women had a certain relationship with it and men had a certain relationship with it. And that's what we have to understand with when they're saying it's androgynous. It's meaning it's actually interacting with both the male and the female. But more importantly, as we're seeing this energy for what it truly is, we realize as it starts breaking down, and I didn't copy and paste this here, but I will explain it. I started asking it deep to give me more definitive answers about the pentagram, and it came down to the core, literally, the core of the meaning of the pentagram, which came to the goddess core, which is Kore. And the mythos of the awareness that in the center of the world lives a being that is synonymous with the pentagram in itself, that in the center of the world, there is a womb. And that what you have going on from the highest level is you have a celestial serpent that came out to the people in the world back in the times as Ahriman, the great serpent. Sometimes when it finally gets to us, it's the demiurge. And then it also gives us our word motherfucker. No pun intended. Because in these actual mysteries, it explains that this being went into his mother. So just like what we're seeing in the virgin goddess, that the sun is actually also inside of her. So these are perspectives, because you'll see that the womb is inside of the earth, and then you'll see that the sun is inside of the womb. But what it's really showing you is it's showing you a unit of like a continuous birth, a continuous birthing and concealment device, if you may. So let's keep going further, because the mysteries get deeper, because you see there's mention of now. Okay, so the reason why the Zoroastrians, because I went in on meditation on this for a while, the reason why the Zoroastrians believed that a man would beget a demon if he made it with a menstruating woman was because they knew within their wise men, because they were like, even with the term the Magus came from the Zoroastrians, they knew that during the time of a woman's menstruation cycle, the celestial serpent is actually moving through her or all the women. And the power of the concealer is always within the world, because there's always a menstruation happening. There will never be a time where something is not menstruating. And a woman is not menstruating. And I'm not even going to rope in the animals into this, even though they're also included. Actually, they're really included. But what this is that if you could imagine, like, let's imagine that you can see in the sky for what's really going on, and you would see this energy moving through. And you would see this energy even moving through the woman's wombs during certain times. And when the energy is entering into their wombs, they actually go into that first moment of when the virgin core basically became a woman, because she went through her first coupling. Okay? So remember, now what we've done with this is we've now put this into like a story where you're like seeing a woman there, and then you're seeing like a snake creature. And this is pretty much the best that human beings can do because of their level of awareness. But the things that we're actually talking about are on a whole different level and a whole different magnitude. And this is why it is generally very difficult to enter into the sanctum of the mysteries. For instance, here's another thing. So even though later on, because there are different things that are happening, because there's choice. Okay, so watch. Let me show you how this works. So it was designed to where it would be you would have choice, but it would be a no-brainer to what you would choose. Okay, that's why there is a scripture that says, "Choose life." Like I set before you two paths. Why do you not choose life? So you can see that a person with the proper faculties, it's going to be pretty easy for them to keep choosing the direction that is going to get them more and more into the awareness of who they are, back to the love story and the total unity with and all the different levels of all that happening, right? So it's like technically you should be hardwired to always make it home or make it back to yourself. There was never anything unexpected that occurred, but you have to understand why that would be difficult if there is a concealing component, because it would kind of conceal the door to how to get home. And how that plays out is with what you would call evil. It's this choice that doesn't actually make any sense to make, but yet we can be coerced into making it. Now, this is also where the serpent hating started, okay? And at the end of the day, what this power is like fire. We need fire to keep warm. We need fire to do a lot of stuff that's going on in our reality. But too much fire will burn everything. And this is what is called a sacred power. A sacred power is like a holiest of holies. If you touch it, you got to remember that now what can happen from here can actually really affect you. And that's why sex is a sacred power. It's a fire. And, when you're kindling your fire and you don't even know what's going on, the repercussions of what can occur, though, because of the elements you're playing with, that's why we, bring kids in the world with this. So it's important to remember that, like, while they would still be trying to have everybody look at, like, all these other different things as being what power really is, it's a smoke screen from realizing that it's actually sitting right here. And the bigger choices that are being made are coming from this sexual center of the being. Okay, so let's keep going. So then if you want to play this story out, like, especially for males, because now what happens is that you have this succession of basically beings who can't really control their fire. This is kind of called a thunderer. It's a reality where the actual energetic of the being it can't control itself. This is why you notice on the back of the demi is the urge, the demiurge, the urges, right? And basically in the Gnosticism and even in the Kabbalah, what's laid out is also that, remember, as I said, that there's a concealment that happens. This is called also a shell, right? Because a shell kind of surrounds things. So this is why you get this serpent symbolism, and then you get it also related to what you would think are evil and wicked things, because you also have someone kind of rolling the good, the bad, the male serpent, the female serpent, all into the same bundle of a mind that doesn't understand sex and the sacred mysteries and the rituals. You see what I mean? So everything sounds crazy. And this is why anybody who really chose in that madness of their mind to go forward and get initiated, they created what we would call evil, more concealment, because they were like blind and ignorant. So that's why I say in the in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So the one-eyed man is this mystery of Osiris and Set, the two-brother mystery, okay? The two-brother mystery is basically a code to explain that Osiris and Set are actually the same being. It's the same thing that goes on in the Old Testament. There's two gods there if you really read what's going on. But they're actually the same being. And this is why most people think that there's only one God in the Old Testament, because you don't catch it. But the deeper mysteries say it's Osiris is just technically the day, and Set is technically the night of the same person. The Set is the nighttime things that happen in nature, that kind of like the things that go on in nature, like in the back scene that nobody wants to talk about. So there's this front part of nature, like the flowers and sunrise and all that. And then there's this other part of nature where like the ants then attack this dead bird and it's dragging the blood all across the sidewalk. You see what I mean? So most people are, of course, more familiar with, now this is what's interesting. We would rather the sunsets, or excuse me, in this case, the sunrise, we'll use that to not confuse things. We would rather the sunrise and then the paradise. But when it's time to make choices, we sometimes seem to keep choosing the one that was only available because we needed to create concealment. Do you see where I'm coming from? We created this evil based on a good idea, but it was like never like I thought that somebody would choose that. We just needed to open up the component of choice so that we can create a separation between us and the unified, grand, holiest of holies, blow your mind. And what was then supposed to occur is this love story, literally, of us coming into this awareness of life and existence. And then it's almost like when people explain like their after near-death experience, and they're like, oh, I was there with my family. And so they're getting closer to it. And it wants to enlist this kind of feeling. This is the whole reason why I designed all of this way. So this is what also end up becoming like what you would say is religious and spiritual traditions. Because then easily there could be a person inserted or like a king inserted into that position of like, come back home to the king, like the prodigal son kind of stories. When in reality, when you're looking at this from a deeper level, because you now need to kind of know how things start playing out. So from Sybil here, I have a excerpt that I call When Fire Consumes. And this is basically, as I mentioned this as the rebellious son story, because all of the stories of what can play out in the house of cards are based on the same stories that can play out in a family. So also remember that traditionally all the family is in the same even house. Like even for a while, it was like, even after we got out of the villages and the tribes together and the communities together, we was in the house together. Like if you go back, to like 100 years, 200 years into some of the old countries, all the families, the mother was, they put the mother up there in the attic, great grandmother be still back in a room somewhere. You see what I mean? That's how it was. It was like everybody was in this same containment. This is now only until modern times that, we're not there. So especially in a dysfunctional family, when you have like the DNA kind of more collapsing on itself from bad ideas, the things that the kids are doing to each other and the parents are doing to the kids is further kind of damaging or degrading the whole structure. I'm sure you'll agree, right? But because when everybody's in the house together, you see what I mean? It's like, okay, my uncle lives upstairs and he's alcoholic. And you see what I mean? So you got to remember that there's been a lot of time for humanity to be in the house together and to basically be doing a lot of damage to the DNA. So in that, we go back to the original story, though, because what's playing out in the house, and you can always go beyond all this, but what's playing out in the house actually happened in the original house, the big house. And here it is, as it says, Amun played a major role. Also, I found out Buddha was from Babylon, but we'll get into that in a minute, or maybe not. Amun or Aman played a major role in the Patriarchal Wars that began in Egypt under Menes. The priests of Amun seized all the major Mamasi temples, enhancing their political and economic power and influence throughout the world. They also seized the most powerful temple in Delphi in Greece and installed male priests to oversee the priestesses, and then invaded and usurped the major Sybil temples in Libya and Ethiopia. Okay, so you're reading this on the surface. But what you have to understand, if you're going to be a beetle on the wall, because we're not flies, so on the beetle on the wall is going to also see that, whoa, the knowledge, though, is what we need to understand. Where is it moving? The sacred mysteries of these priestesses involve sex. So it's not just bringing priests into the women temple. That's the smokescreen. It's somehow taking over the whole process of birthing and bringing beings into the world in that knowledge. And that's why if you don't see it right there, you'll totally miss it. And because this later on picks up as the Moorish story, where the Moors were getting these women from all these foreign countries and then teaching them. They were basically making them priestesses. And this is where this whole thing came in with what you're calling today pimping, where you have this kind of like this dark male, right? Like a darkness, like a distortion, evil kind of predatory thing going on over the feminine energy, and using the feminine energy's power to actually gain more control over anything that can be folded by this energy. And this is also why I talked about how these Moors would send women at a lot of these sheikhs and different things like that. They would send a woman as like a gift, and it would be long before his whole empire would be crumbled. So this is just making sure we understand, because the priesthood of Amun can only be a certain group of people if you understand the whole landscape of what's happening. But this is when, just like what we saw with even like the Ramses attitude of where it's like sidestep the mother, sacred mysteries, but I need the power. But then I got these priestesses And I can like use these priestesses and this sexual power with these priestesses, and I can, you see what I mean? And then this is what creates this cult where then from the outset, like if we're looking at this, we're like, we can't tell who the good ones are, who the bad ones are. We can't tell if this is about the great mother and the goddess or the woman, or is it about Mel the pimp, or is it about Saturn? Or you see how it's like a smokescreen, because the whole thing in itself is designed off of one key component: concealment. Its whole purpose is to conceal. We design evil to conceal good. And that's in fact what it does. Because in the reality, the more crazy stuff starts happening, people tripping and all that kind of stuff, you just think about this. If the whole direction was that we would be going gradually more and more to awareness of ourselves, and like you start feeling this energy, like I was laying on the bed and I just start feeling this energy. I just had to stop her with a bit. Are you feeling this energy? I was like, oh my goodness, are you interrupting me from feeling this energy? But it's just all because I'm just uncapping like any other going in the other direction. And I got a chance to link up with Finn the other day, and I was explaining to him what the other direction is, like how the mind goes into this, like it goes backwards at a certain point in its thoughts, like it gets negative, right, or distorted, right, because it goes into concealment. That's what you'll say. But the reality is it's like this. Like imagine if I'm driving a stick, for anybody who drove a stick. So I'm topping off, I'm like third gear, I'm running high, I'm at ARPM, right? And then I put my foot on the clutch to shift into fourth or my next gear, and I just hold the clutch. And the car's like, and I'll never engage. And then I finally engage the next gear. But by the time I engage the next gear, I've lost all my speed. This is what it's like to have a mind and a consciousness that's constantly going into evil and distortion and what's wrong and who's the evil one and who's the killer and which one do I not like and are they really good or are they really after me? That is concealment, right? So then let me show you how it gets real tricky. So in the Arabic tradition, as you can see, the woman is veiled. And this is because technically then the closest thing, because remember the serpent is androgynous, but there is a direction with all of these energies where it's still more of that. So the closest thing in certain ways to the external appearance of the woman beside the male's phallus is the beauty again of the woman. Like, so what I'm saying is that the closest thing to the unified field is technically, when it's externalized, is the beauty of a woman. Because there's either going to be the grotesqueness or there's going to be the beauty. But when it comes out into the external reality, our perception of beauty is, is kind of like the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But there's a perception of beauty. So this is why in these next layer of male priestess cults, if you may, they veil the woman. They need the woman to actually be like in those sanctums. They need to symbolically say that they have actually put the veil on the woman because the woman is the mystery.